I want to start with the moment because the moment is what everything else hangs on. Not the beginning, I'll get to the beginning. But the moment itself, because if you've ever had someone hand a weapon to the person you love most in the world and smile while they did it, you'll understand why I have to start there. It was a Saturday afternoon in October. My husband Daniel and I were at his parents' house for what had been billed as a casual family lunch. His mother Patricia, his father Ron, his sister Cassandra, and Cassandra's husband Miles. 6 people around a dining room table with good china and a pot roast and the particular surface pleasantness of a family that has always been better at performing warmth than actually feeling it. We were on dessert, his mother's apple cake, the one she made for every occasion because it was the one thing she did reliably well, when Cassandra reached into the bag hanging on the back of her chair and placed a manila envelope on the table.
Thick. Sealed.
She slid it across the linen cloth toward Daniel with both hands, the way you'd present something important, and she smiled the specific smile of someone who has been waiting a very long time for this moment. "I think you need to see this," she said. "I'm sorry, Daniel. I really am. But you deserve to know the truth." The table went quiet. Patricia set down her fork. Ron looked at his hands. I looked at Cassandra, and she looked back at me with the calm, satisfied expression of someone who has already rehearsed the scene and knows exactly how it ends. Daniel looked at the envelope. Then he looked at me. Then he picked it up. I did not say anything. I did not reach for it. I did not explain or defend or perform any of the reactions Cassandra had clearly been expecting, because in that moment, sitting at that table with apple cake going cold on my plate, I understood something with complete, clarifying certainty. Whatever was in that envelope, she was more afraid of it than I was. She just didn't know that yet. My name is Renata Vasquez-Cole. Daniel and I have been married for 4 years, and together for 7. We met at a conference in the unremarkable way that people who are going to spend their lives together sometimes meet, standing in the same line for bad coffee, disagreeing about something inconsequential, discovering 20 minutes later that the disagreement had been a conversation, and the conversation had been the beginning of everything. I am a structural engineer. I design the bones of buildings, the load-bearing systems, the foundations, the elements that are invisible once the walls go up, but that determine whether the structure stands or falls. I am methodical by training and precise by temperament, and I have always believed that the most important things in any system are not the visible surfaces, but the underlying architecture. This belief has served me well professionally. It has served me equally well personally, in ways I did not always anticipate. Daniel is an architect. We joke that this is either very romantic or a professional conflict of interest, and after 7 years the answer is still both. He is warm in the way that certain men are warm, not performatively, not strategically, but genuinely, the way a room is warm when there's a fire in it. He is also, when it matters, absolutely clear-eyed. This is the quality that Cassandra consistently underestimated about her brother, and it is the quality that ultimately undid her. Cassandra and I have never liked each other. I want to be accurate about this rather than retroactively framing her as the obvious villain and myself as the obvious innocent. We simply did not like each other from the first dinner, and we were both adult enough to manage it, and for several years the management was adequate. She found me cold. I found her calculating. We were both right about each other. The difference was that I kept my assessment private, and she eventually did something with hers. The problems began, in their visible form, about 2 years into our marriage. We had been trying to have a child. This is not unusual and not something I had intended to discuss publicly, but it is the context without which what Cassandra did makes less sense. So I'll tell you. We had been trying for 18 months. It was hard in the quiet way that these things are hard. Not dramatic, not crisis level, just a persistent low grief that sits underneath the ordinary texture of your life and occasionally surfaces at moments you don't expect. Cassandra had a daughter. She had been pregnant before we even started trying, and she had the particular quality of some people with something you want, not exactly gloating but a heightened visibility about it. She talked about her daughter constantly at family events, which was normal and expected and something I genuinely tried to be gracious about. But there were moments, glances, comments, the specific way she'd mention a pregnancy milestone in a room where everyone knew we were trying, that had a quality I can only describe as deliberate. I said nothing. I am very good at saying nothing. I should tell you something about the years before the shift, because they contain a detail that becomes important later. In the second year of our marriage, Daniel and I bought a house. A 1940s craftsman that needed work, which suited us both since we were professionally oriented toward buildings and their improvement. We spent 8 months renovating it on weekends, making decisions together the way that couples who are genuinely good at being together make decisions, with disagreement and discussion and eventual consensus and the particular satisfaction of a shared project going well. Cassandra came once during the renovation and walked through every room with the assessing quality I recognized, and at the end she said, to Daniel, not to me, "You've done a good job with it."
It was a small thing,
but I noted it. I note everything. I also want to tell you about a conversation I had with Daniel in the third year of our marriage because it illuminates something about the kind of man he is that the events of the lunch table later confirmed. We had been having a difficult period with the external weight of the fertility situation. One evening I came home from a long day and was not managing it well. Daniel sat down next to me and said, very simply, "I need you to know that the outcome of this doesn't change anything about what I chose when I chose you. I chose you. That part is not up for renegotiation." I am not someone who cries easily, but I stored that sentence somewhere important, and I returned to it more times than I can count in the months that followed. About 3 years into the marriage, things shifted. Cassandra began asking questions about our relationship that had nothing to do with curiosity and everything to do with data collection. Small questions, casually inserted. Where had Daniel been last Tuesday? Had he seemed distracted recently? Wasn't it difficult being married to someone so focused on their career? I answered them pleasantly and gave her nothing. She tried different angles.
I closed each one.
What I didn't know, and wouldn't know for another year, was that she had already hired someone. The private investigator's name was Gary Thorne. He ran a small firm out of an office in the east side of the city, and Cassandra had been paying him for 11 months before that Saturday lunch. I know this because the report she handed my husband at the dining room table was thoroughly documented, and documentation, as I have mentioned, is something I have always understood. What Cassandra had commissioned was a surveillance report on me. My movements over 11 months. Where I went. Who I met. Whether I met with anyone she could construct into a narrative of infidelity or deception. She had paid, I would later learn, approximately $4,000 for this service. $4,000. 11 months. Gary Thorne following me to construction sites and coffee shops, and the hospital where my mother received treatment for the hip she had replaced in February. She had found nothing. Of course, she had found nothing, because there was nothing to find. But a report containing nothing is not what Cassandra had handed across the table. A report containing nothing doesn't get handed across a table at Sunday lunch with that particular smile. What she had handed across the table was something she had constructed from the fragments that Gary Thorne's surveillance had accidentally uncovered. Not about me, but about a situation adjacent to me that she had decided she could shape into a story. I will explain what was in the report. But first I need to tell you something about my mother, because my mother is where the Betrayal story begins. My mother, Elena Vasquez, is 71 years old and lives 40 minutes from the city in the house where I grew up. She is a small woman with very straight posture and opinions about everything and a way of making tamales that I have tried to replicate for 15 years without success. She has been widowed for 12 years, since my father died of a heart attack on a Tuesday in March that I remember with the specific clarity of days that divide your life into before and after. After my father died, my mother managed. This is the word for it, managed. Not flourished, not struggled visibly, but managed, with the particular competence of a woman who had always been the structural engineer of her own household, who had always been the load-bearing element that kept everything standing. She worked part-time at the library for 6 years. She maintained the house. She came to every significant event in my life with her back straight and her opinions intact, and her tamales, always, because the tamales were her language of love, and she was not a woman who left important things unsaid. What she did not tell me, for 11 years after my father's death, was that she had been managing with help. Not financial help. She was not struggling financially. My father had been careful. Practical help. The kind that an aging woman living alone in a house with a yard and a roof and various systems that periodically required attention needed, and was too proud to ask for directly. She had, over those 11 years, developed a friendship with a man named Arthur Chin, who lived 3 blocks away and who had been widowed himself for years after my mother. They walked together on Tuesday and Thursday mornings. He fixed things that broke. She fed him dinners. It was, as I would eventually understand it, a companionship that had become, quietly and without announcement, something more. My mother had not told me because she was afraid of how I would receive it. My father had been gone 11 years and she was 71, and she was afraid her daughter would feel that a new companionship was a betrayal of a man 12 years in the ground. This was not a rational fear.
I would not have felt that way.
But love makes people afraid of irrational things, and my mother, for all her straight posture and strong opinions, was not immune. Gary Thorne had photographed Arthur coming and going from my mother's house on 8 separate occasions. He had photographed my car in my mother's driveway on those same days. I visited when I knew Arthur would be there because my mother had finally, 2 months before the lunch, told me, and I had been glad for her, and I had been building a relationship with Arthur slowly and deliberately in the way I do everything. Cassandra had looked at those photographs and built a story. She had decided to imply, which is more careful and equally effective, that the man visiting my mother's house was someone I was involved with. That my visits coincided with his because we were meeting there. That the woman in the photographs was not visiting her mother but conducting an affair in a house that provided cover. It was not true. It was not close to true. But photographs are photographs, and a story built around photographs, presented at a family lunch with china and apple cake and a well-timed smile, can do real damage before the truth has time to assemble itself. Or so she thought. Daniel opened the envelope. He was quiet while he read. He is always quiet when he reads. It is one of the things I noticed about him in that conference line 7 years ago, the quality of his attention. He went through the pages methodically, and I watched his face, and I said nothing. Cassandra was watching him too, with the barely contained energy of someone waiting for an explosion they have carefully arranged. His mother had picked up her fork again and put it down. His father was looking at the window. When Daniel finished reading, he set the report down on the table. He was quiet for another moment. Then he looked at his sister. Before I tell you what was on page 31, if this story is getting to you, hit that subscribe button right now and ring that bell. Every week on this channel there is a story like this one. I don't want you to miss a single one.
Now.
Page 31. This is a surveillance report, he said. It's documentation, Cassandra said, of what Renata has been. It's a surveillance report, Daniel said again, in a tone that was not louder than the first time but was significantly different. You hired someone to follow my wife. I hired someone because I was worried about you.
For how long? He said. She paused.
11 months. Something moved across Daniel's face. He looked at me. I said quietly, "The man in the photographs is Arthur Chin." He's been my mother's companion for about 3 years. I've known for 2 months. I've been building a relationship with him. That's why my car is there when he's there. Silence. You can call my mother right now, I said. I put my phone on the table. Her number is in my contacts. Her name is Elena. Cassandra's expression shifted. Not dramatically, she was too practiced for that. But something recalculated behind her eyes. She had been prepared for denial. She had not been prepared for a phone on the table and a voice that had not broken. Daniel picked up the report again. He turned to a page near the back. I would see it later. A page I hadn't known about yet. He read it. Then he looked at Cassandra for a long moment. Cass, he said, did you read this entire report? She frowned. Of course I read. Page 31, he said. He placed the report in the center of the table and turned it so the page faced her. I think you should read page 31. Here is what Gary Thorne had found, buried in the ancillary research he had conducted as part of his surveillance sweep of people connected to me. Private investigators, when they are thorough, and Gary Thorne was, whatever else might be said about how his services were commissioned, thorough, do not simply follow one person. They build a picture of a network. They run background checks on individuals who appear in their subject's orbit. They cross-reference addresses, records, public filings. It is comprehensive, methodical work, and it occasionally surfaces information that the person who commissioned the report was not expecting. Gary Thorne had run a background check on Arthur Chin as part of his sweep of people connected to my movements. Standard procedure. And in doing so, he had surfaced a public record that connected Arthur Chin to a name I didn't recognize, but that Cassandra, sitting across the table from Daniel on that October afternoon, recognized immediately. Arthur Chen's late wife, the woman he had been married to for 31 years before her death, had a maiden name that appeared in court records from a civil dispute in 1987. A dispute involving a real estate transaction. A transaction involving a company that had been co-owned as a minor partner by Ronald Jerome Cole, Daniel's father. The 1987 dispute was not, in itself, dramatic. It had been settled out of court, the records were partial, and Gary Thorne had noted it simply as a connection without elaboration. But Gary Thorne was not from this family. He did not know what Daniel knew, and what I would learn later that afternoon. He did not know that 1987 was the year Ron Cole had been briefly absent from the family for what Patricia had always described as a work posting. He did not know that the name on the court record, the woman involved in the disputed transaction, whose maiden name matched Arthur Chen's late wife, was also the name of a woman Patricia had once mentioned, years ago, in the context of a falling out so old she described it as ancient history.
He did not know any of this.
But Cassandra did. I could see it in her face as she read page 31. The color left it in a way that had nothing to do with being caught in her scheme against me. This was a different kind of recognition. This was the face of someone who had just understood that the trap she had set for someone else had a floor beneath the floor, and she was standing on it.
What is this? She said.
Very quietly.
I don't know yet, Daniel said.
He was looking at his father. But I think Dad does. The room was completely still. Patricia had gone the color of the linen tablecloth. Ron Cole set down his wine glass with the careful deliberateness of a man buying himself 2 seconds to decide something. He didn't get the 2 seconds. Ron, Patricia said. Her voice had a quality I had never heard from her before. What is this? It was not a question. It had the shape of a question, but the weight of something else entirely. The weight of a woman who has suspected something for a long time and is now watching the confirmation walk across the room toward her whether she wants it or not. Ron Cole looked at his wife. Then he looked at his son. Then he looked at his daughter, who had gone completely still in her chair with a surveillance report open in front of her, the report she had paid $4,000 for, the report she had prepared to destroy my marriage with, which was currently dismantling something else entirely. I had a relationship, Ron said, before your mother and I were married. The woman's name was Linda. It ended before the wedding. I thought he stopped. I thought it had ended completely. The court record is from 1987, Daniel said. You and Mom were married in 1982. A silence so complete you could hear the refrigerator running in the kitchen. Ron, Patricia said. One word. His name. Like a door closing. I am going to tell you what happened in the 3 hours after page 31 was read, and I want to be precise because precision is how I process things, and it is also how I protect them. The details, when they are real, resist being reshaped later into something more convenient. Cassandra left first. She stood up from the table without speaking, picked up her bag, said Miles, in a voice that meant they were going, and walked through the front door without looking at any of us. Miles followed with a confused, slightly apologetic expression of a man who had not known what the envelope contained and was now recalibrating everything. Ron and Patricia went into the kitchen. We could hear them, not the words, but the sound of two people having a conversation that had been stored under pressure for a very long time and was now being released. It was not a comfortable sound. It was the sound of structural integrity being tested. Daniel and I sat at the dining room table alone. The apple cake was still there. The good china. The report in the center of the table between us. He reached across and took my hand. I'm sorry, he said. For all of it. For 11 months of someone following you. For my sister. For this afternoon. You didn't do any of it, I said. No, he said. But it happened in my family and at my table, and I want you to know that I'm sorry it happened anywhere near you. I looked at him. I thought about 7 years and about the conference line and the bad coffee and the 20-minute conversation that had been the beginning. I thought about how a person's character is most visible not in the easy moments, but in the moments when they have to choose, quickly, between comfort and honesty. Daniel had chosen honesty in about 30 seconds. He had read a report designed to make him doubt me, and he had looked at his sister and asked how long she'd been surveilling his wife, because that was the first fact that mattered to him. I know, I said. We sat there for a while. Outside, October was doing what October does. The light going amber and low, the leaves beginning their last extravagance before the cold. It was, despite everything, a beautiful afternoon. I called my mother. I told her what had happened, briefly, without all the details, enough so that she understood Arthur's name had come up and how, and that she might receive a call from Daniel who would want to talk to her. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, in the voice she uses when she is deciding to be brave about something, I'll tell him everything he needs to know. And you tell that husband of yours that Arthur makes a very good tamale, and I've been trying to get him over for dinner for months. I laughed. It was the first time I had laughed since we arrived at the house that afternoon, and it came out slightly wrong. Too sudden, too relieved, but it was real, and Daniel heard it and squeezed my hand, and that was the moment the afternoon turned. She called me 6 days later. Not Daniel, me. I found this significant, and I still do. She called from her own number, which told me she wasn't pretending the call wasn't happening. She was direct, which I had always credited her with even when she was directing it at me sideways. She said, I owe you an apology. I'm going to give you one. Whether you accept it is your business. All right, I said. I hired Gary Thorne because I was convinced you were wrong for Daniel, she said. I told myself I was protecting him. I wasn't. I was controlling him, which I have been doing in one form or another since we were children, and which my own therapist has been telling me for 2 years is the thing I do instead of trusting people. A pause. I'm sorry, Renata. I'm sorry I surveilled you. I'm sorry I built a case out of photographs that meant nothing. I'm sorry I staged that lunch the way I did. I was quiet for a moment. The apology was precise and unadorned, and it had the texture of something that had cost her something real to produce. I recognized this. I recognized the effort of saying a true thing without dressing it up. I appreciate that, I said. I'm not going to tell you everything is fine because it isn't yet, but I appreciate it. That's fair, she said. Can I ask you something? I said. Yes. Did you know? Before you read page 31. About your father and Linda. A silence. Longer than the others. I suspected something, she said finally. I found a letter years ago, in a box in the garage. I never said anything because I don't know, because I didn't want it to be real, because it was easier to channel the energy somewhere else. Another pause. I think I chose you because you were easier to be angry at than the thing I was actually afraid of. I sat with that for a moment. It was, I thought, the most honest thing she had ever said to me. And it reframed enough of the past 3 years that I needed a moment to let the reframing settle. Thank you for telling me that, I said. We talked for another 10 minutes. About nothing important. About the ordinary surface things that are sometimes the safest place to end a conversation that has gone somewhere real. When we hung up, I sat in my office for a while and looked at the structural drawings on my desk, the load-bearing calculations for a building I was working on, the numbers that determine what holds and what doesn't, and I thought about what holds a family together when the foundations aren't what you thought they were. I didn't arrive at a clean answer. I don't think clean answers exist for that question, but I thought about it for a long time. The situation with Daniel's parents is still unfolding, and I want to be honest about that rather than give you a resolution that isn't fully true yet. What I can tell you, Ron had a son born in 1988, 1 year after the court dispute, to Linda, whose maiden name was the one in the record, and who had married Arthur Chun in 1991, and who had died of cancer in 2019, 3 years before Arthur began walking on Tuesday and Thursday mornings with my mother. Arthur Chen's stepson, the child Linda brought into the marriage, the boy who had grown up in the city as someone else's son, who was now in his mid-30s and knew only that his biological father was a man who had chosen not to be in his life, was connected, through a chain of events and relationships that no one had designed and everyone had somehow contributed to the family whose dining room table had just been detonated by a manila envelope. Daniel has not yet decided what to do with this. He is processing it in the careful, methodical way he processes everything, which is one of the reasons I married him. Patricia and Ron are in couples counseling, which is either very hopeful or very late depending on how you look at it. Cassandra and I are at the beginning of something that I would not call a friendship, but that I would call, carefully, an honest acquaintance. Miles continues to have the slightly bewildered expression of a man who attended a family lunch and ended up in a different story than the one he expected. And Arthur Chun, who fixed things for my mother and ate her dinners and walked with her on Tuesday and Thursday mornings, and who had no idea that the family his late wife had been connected to through a legal dispute in 1987 was the same family his new companion's daughter had married into. Arthur, who when Daniel called him, which he did 3 days after the lunch, quietly and without any agenda other than wanting to understand, answered every question with the straightforward dignity of a man who has nothing to hide and nothing to protect except the truth. Arthur said he had always known about the child. He had raised Linda's son as his own. He had honored her wish that the biological father not be contacted, because the biological father had made his choice and Linda had made hers. He said, "I'm telling you this because you asked and because you deserve honesty. What you do with it is your decision. The boy, the man, he's had a good life. He doesn't know about any of this. That's also your decision now, not mine." Daniel thanked him. They have had 2 more conversations since then. I don't know where it leads. I don't think anyone does. But I know that Daniel is approaching it the way he approaches everything, with his eyes open and his hands steady and his fundamental commitment to honest architecture, which is one of the things I love most about him. There's something I've been turning over since that October afternoon, something about the nature of the weapon Cassandra chose, and what it says about the person who chooses it. When you hire someone to surveil another person, when you spend $4,000 and 11 months building a case, you are committing to a story before you have the evidence for it. You have already decided what the evidence will show. You are not investigating. You are confirming. And the danger of that approach, the structural danger, is that you are building on an assumption rather than a foundation, and assumptions are not load-bearing. They collapse under the weight of the actual truth, which does not care about your narrative and does not bend for your timeline and does not, when it arrive only as far as you wanted it to. The truth that arrived at that lunch table went further than anyone in the room had been standing. It went through Cassandra's scheme and kept going, all the way back to 1987 and a relationship and a child and 35 years of a secret that Ron had chosen to bury and that had been lying there, patient and permanent, waiting for exactly the kind of thorough, methodical, well-documented excavation that a private investigator running a background sweep provides.
Cassandra aimed at me.
The truth ricocheted. I am not glad about the collateral. I am not glad that Patricia is in counseling processing something that has shaken a 40-year marriage. I am not glad that somewhere in this city there is a man in his mid-30s who may or may not learn, depending on decisions made by a family he doesn't know, that his biological history is different than he understood. These are real people and real griefs and real consequences, and I take no pleasure in any of them. But I am glad about this. When the envelope came across the table and my husband opened it, he read the pages and he looked at me, and the first question he asked was how long someone had been following me, not whether the photographs meant what his sister wanted them to mean. He did not doubt me first and ask questions second. He chose honesty over comfort in 30 seconds, and I had married the right person. My mother and Arthur came to dinner last month.
He brought wine.
She brought tamales. Daniel spent 45 minutes talking to Arthur about a renovation project Arthur is thinking about for his kitchen, and I sat across the table and watched two people I love be comfortable with two people they were just learning to love, and the evening had the quality of something real and unperformed, and exactly what it was. I have thought in the months since October about what I would have done if the report had contained something real. If Gary Thorne's 11 months of following me had found something Cassandra could actually use. I want to be honest with myself about this, which means acknowledging that the clean outcome we had was not a guaranteed one. It required a specific set of coincidences: Arthur's connection to Ron, Gary Thorne's thoroughness, page 31 existing at all. If those elements had been different, if the report had been only photographs and no background sweep, I might be telling a very different story right now. I think about this not to generate anxiety about what might have been, but to stay honest about what allowed things to go the way they went. I was innocent.
Daniel believed me.
But the mechanism that exposed Cassandra's scheme was not my innocence alone. It was a private investigator's professional thoroughness surfacing a connection no one in the room was expecting. Justice, in this instance, arrived through an accident of methodology. It does not always.
I know this.
I hold this knowledge carefully. What I have decided to take from the whole experience is something about visibility. I have always been good at being invisible, at saying nothing, noting everything, filing things away. It has served me. But the afternoon at that dining table taught me something about the cost of total invisibility. The people around you fill the space you leave with their own projections, their own stories, their own envelopes. You cannot be so invisible that you become a canvas for someone else's narrative. You have to take up space, deliberately and accurately, so that the space is yours and not theirs. I have been practicing this in the year, since October. Saying things directly. Taking up the space my presence creates rather than compressing myself into someone else's comfort. It is, For someone who has spent her career thinking about load-bearing structures, an interesting personal project. The question of what you are actually built for when you stop performing smallness. The answer I am finding is considerably more than I had been allowing myself. Cassandra came to our house for the first time in November. She brought flowers, which felt like a beginning. We had dinner. It was careful and slightly formal and not yet warm, but it was honest, and honest is the foundation everything else has to be built on. I know more about foundations than most people. I know what they can hold when they're properly constructed, and I know what they can't hold when they're built on something that isn't true. The structural drawings on my desk have a principle I come back to regularly. A building is only as strong as the integrity of its most fundamental element. You cannot make a compromised foundation perform like a solid one. You can only replace it. We are replacing things. Slowly, correctly, one true piece at a time. The building is still standing. That was Renata's story. And if you made it this far, thank you. Truly. If this story stayed with you, if you've ever had someone aim something at you and watched it turn around on them instead, or if you've ever sat at a table and watched a family discover a truth it wasn't ready for, drop a comment below. I read every single one, and I want to hear from you. Hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss a story like this. And if this one moved you, a like means more than you know. It tells the algorithm this story is worth sharing, and every share means someone else gets to hear it. See you in the next one.